The morning sun beat down on the dusty western town set at Paramount Studios. It was July 1968, and the temperature was already climbing toward 90 degrees. But nobody on set was complaining about the heat. They were too focused on what was about to happen. Dean Martin stood in the middle of the main street, dressed in full western regalia, black hat, leather vest, gun belt sitting low on his hip. The holster held a Colt .45 Peacemaker, the iconic weapon of the Old West. Around him, the entire crew had gathered, cameras ready, everyone waiting. This wasn't a scheduled scene. This was something else entirely. This was the moment Dean Martin was about to prove something that would become one of the most talked about incidents in Hollywood Western history. The moment he would draw his gun faster than almost anyone in the business had ever seen. And Clint Eastwood was watching. The setup, when the crooner became a gunslinger. Dean Martin wasn't supposed to be a Western star. He was the smooth crooner, the charming drunk from the Rat Pack, the guy who made everything look effortless with a martini in one hand and a microphone in the other. He sang songs about amore and romance. He traded jokes with Frank Sinatra and Jerry Lewis. He was Hollywood royalty, sure, but he was a lover, not a fighter. Except Dean Martin had a secret. Behind the cool exterior and the laid-back persona was a man who took his craft seriously, deadly seriously. When Dean committed to something, he didn't just show up and rely on charisma. He worked, he trained, he practiced until his hands bled and his muscles screamed. And when Dean Martin decided to do westerns, he didn't want to be another actor playing cowboy. He wanted to be the real deal. It started with Rio Bravo in 1959, where he played the drunk gunslinger dude opposite John Wayne. Howard Hawks directed, and Hawks had a reputation for demanding authenticity. If you were going to draw a gun in a Hawks Western, you better know how to draw a gun. Dean took that seriously. He hired a fast draw instructor named Arvo Ohala, the same man who taught James Arness, Hugh O'Brien, and dozens of other Western stars. Ohala was a legend in the business. He could draw and fire in less than a quarter of a second. He'd trained the best, and now he was training Dean Martin. Every morning before filming, Dean would spend 2 hours practicing his draw. Not the acting, not the scene work. Just the draw. Over and over and over. Drawing the weapon, holstering it, drawing again. Hundreds of times. Thousands of times. Until the motion became muscle memory. Until the gun felt like an extension of his arm. Until he could do it without thinking. The crew on Rio Bravo noticed. John Wayne noticed. Dean wasn't just adequate with a gun. He was fast. Genuinely, remarkably fast. But Dean didn't show off. He did his scenes, delivered his lines. And when people complimented his gun work, he'd shrug it off with that Dean Martin charm. I just got lucky, he'd say with a smile. But luck had nothing to do with it. Dean Martin had put in the work. And by 1968, after several westerns under his belt, Dean had become one of the fastest draws in Hollywood, maybe the fastest, and he was about to prove it. The challenge that changed everything. The bet started the way most Hollywood bets start, with whiskey and big talk. Dean was filming 5 Card Stud, another western where he played a gambling gunslinger. Between takes, the stunt coordinator, a tough old cowboy named Hal Needham, mentioned that he'd worked with some of the fastest quick-draw artists in the business. How fast? Dean asked, genuinely curious. The best I've seen could draw and fire in about a third of a second. Hal said, maybe 0.35, 0.4 seconds. That's world-class speed. Dean took a sip of his coffee. Real coffee this time. Not the prop whiskey that everyone joked about. What if someone could do it in 0.2 seconds? Hal laughed. Dean, that's physically impossible. The human nervous system can't react that fast. You'd need superhuman reflexes. What if it wasn't about reflexes? Dean said quietly, what if it was about knowing the moment was coming? About preparation and training and muscle memory? Hal looked at Dean more carefully. You saying you can draw in 0.2 seconds? I'm saying I'd like to try, Dean replied. Tomorrow morning, set up the cameras. Get the timing equipment, and let's see what happens. Word spread to the set like wildfire. Dean Martin was going to attempt a 0.2 second draw. The crew was skeptical. The producers were intrigued. The other actors wanted to watch. And someone made a phone call to Clint Eastwood, who was filming on a nearby lot. Clint had become the face of the Western in the 1960s. His work with Sergio Leone had redefined the genre. The man with no name was the coolest, most dangerous gunslinger in cinema. Clint's draw was iconic, that slow, deliberate motion followed by lightning-fast execution. He was a standard, the gold standard, the man every other Western actor was measured against. And Clint wanted to see what Dean Martin could do. The morning everything changed. The set the next morning felt different. Charged. Electric. This wasn't a normal filming day. This was an event. The crew arrived early. Extra cameras were positioned. Hal Needham had brought in professional timing equipment, the same gear used to time Olympic athletes. Multiple cameras would capture the moment from different angles, and the timing would be accurate to the 100th of a second. Dean arrived exactly on time, carrying his gun belt and holster. He wasn't wearing his costume yet, just jeans and a simple white shirt. He looked calm, relaxed even, but the people who knew Dean well could see the focus in his eyes. This mattered to him. He spent 30 minutes warming up, not stretching, not doing vocal exercises like he would before a concert, drawing his gun, over and over, smooth and controlled, not rushing, not trying to go fast, just consistent, perfect repetition. The motion had to be flawless. Speed would come from perfection, not from rushing. Clint Eastwood arrived around 9 in the morning. He came quietly, not wanting to make a big entrance or distract from what Dean was doing. He stood at the back of the crowd with his arms crossed, watching Dean practice with the intense focus that Clint brought to everything. The two men acknowledged each other with a nod. There was mutual respect there. They were both professionals. They both understood what it took to be great at this particular skill. This wasn't about ego or competition. This was about pushing the limits of what was possible. Hal Needham set up the scenario. Dean would stand in a neutral position, hand relaxed at his side. On a specific cue, a light would flash red. That was Dean's signal to draw. The timing equipment would measure the exact moment the light went red to the exact moment Dean's hand touched the gun grip, pulled it from the holster, and brought it to firing position. 0.2 seconds was the target, 1/5 of a single second. The blink of an eye takes 3 to 4/10 of a second. Dean was trying to draw a gun faster than a person could blink. The first attempt was a warm-up. Dean drew clean, smooth, perfect form. Time, 0.42 seconds. Excellent by any standard. Faster than most professionals. But not the goal. Again, Dean said simply, second attempt, 0.35 seconds. The crowd murmured. That was genuinely fast. World-class fast. Dean was in rarefied air now. But Dean's face showed no satisfaction. Again, the moment that stopped time. The third attempt was different. You could feel it in the air. Dean's posture changed slightly. His breathing slowed. His eyes fixed on a light with an intensity that seemed to burn. The entire set went silent. 50 people holding their breath. Hal Needham's hand hovered over the trigger. The light flashed red. What happened next was almost impossible to see with the naked eye. Dean's hand moved in a blur, a motion so fast it seemed to defy physics. The gun appeared in his hand, extended, pointed, ready to fire. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't sloppy. It was perfect, economical motion. Every movement optimized, zero wasted energy. The timing equipment beeped. Hal looked at the readout. His eyes went wide. He looked again, double-checking. Then he looked at Dean with something like awe on his face. 0.20 seconds, Hal announced to the silent crowd. Exactly 0.20 seconds. The set erupted. People cheered, applauded, shouted in disbelief. Dean had done it. He'd achieved what Hal had said was physically impossible. 0.2 seconds from light flash to gun drawn and ready. Dean holstered the weapon calmly, his face showing just a hint of a satisfied smile. Not smug, not boastful, just the quiet satisfaction of a craftsman who executed his craft perfectly. But then something happened that nobody expected. Clint Eastwood stepped forward from the back of the crowd. When the legend spoke, Clint walked slowly through the parting crowd, exactly 0.2 seconds his boots clicking on the wooden boards of the Western Street set. Everyone fell silent again. Clint Eastwood moving with purpose had that effect. He approached Dean, and the two men stood face to face. Hollywood royalty meeting Hollywood royalty. That was remarkable, Clint said, his voice that low, gravelly tone that had become iconic. I've never seen anything like it. Thanks, Clint, Dean replied. Coming from you, that means something. Clint nodded slowly. Then he said something that shocked everyone listening. You just taught me something important. Dean raised an eyebrow. Clint Eastwood, the master of the Western, the man who'd redefined the genre, was saying Dean Martin had taught him something? What's that? Dean asked. I've always approached the draw as part of the character, Clint explained. The slow build, the tension, the moment before the draw is as important as the draw itself. My characters don't need to be the fastest. They need to be the most inevitable. When they draw, you know someone's gonna die. Dean nodded, understanding. That was pure Clint. His Westerns weren't about speed. They were about presence, menace, the weight of violence. But watching you, Clint continued, I realized something. There's another kind of power in pure skill, in being so good at something that it transcends character and becomes art. What you just did wasn't acting. That was mastery. And that's something I need to think about. The respect in Clint's voice was genuine. This wasn't flattery. This was one artist recognizing another artist's achievement. Then Clint turned to Hal Needham. Can I try? The master's response. The crowd buzzed with excitement. Clint Eastwood was going to attempt a timed draw. This day kept getting better. Hal quickly reset the equipment, while someone found a gun belt that would fit Clint. He strapped it on with practiced ease. This wasn't Clint's first rodeo, literally or figuratively. But what happened next shocked everyone, Dean included. Clint didn't position himself for a fast draw. Instead, he took a completely different stance. He stood in his classic Eastwood pose, body angled, hand hovering near the gun but not touching it. The stance from his films. The stance that had made him famous. I'm not going to try to beat Dean's time, Clint announced to the crowd. That's his achievement, and it's incredible. But I want to show you something else. Hal started the countdown. The light flashed red. Clint's hand moved to the gun, but not in a blur. It was deliberate, controlled, smooth as silk. He drew the weapon and extended it in one fluid motion. The time? 0.65 seconds. The crowd didn't know how to react. That was significantly slower than Dean's draw. Some people looked confused. Had Clint just failed? But Dean understood immediately, and a smile spread across his face. Show them the target, Dean said. Clint had done something nobody else had thought to do. While drawing, he'd actually aimed. Not just pointed the gun in a general direction, but properly aimed, sights aligned, finger on the trigger, ready to fire accurately at a specific target. Dean's draw had been about pure speed, getting the gun out and pointed. Clint's draw had been about combat effectiveness. Hal Needham understood too. Do it again, he said. But this time, I'm putting a target down range. They set up a man-sized target 30 feet away. Clint repeated his draw. 0.68 seconds this time. Slightly slower. But when they checked the target, there was a single hole dead center in the chest area. Clint had drawn and fired an accurate shot in less than 0.7 seconds. Now that's impossible, someone in the crowd muttered. But it wasn't impossible. It was just a different kind of mastery. Dean had mastered speed. Clint had mastered combat accuracy. Both were remarkable achievements. Both required years of training and dedication. They were different paths to the same destination, being the absolute best at their craft. The lesson behind the leather. Dean walked over to Clint, genuinely impressed. You've been practicing that. Every day for 10 years, Clint admitted. Arvo Ola taught me that speed without accuracy is just showmanship. But accuracy without adequate speed gets you killed. The trick is finding the balance. Same teacher, Dean said with a laugh. Arvo never mentioned you could do that. I asked him not to, Clint said. Didn't want people knowing. Figured it might come in handy someday for a role. The two men stood there, two giants of Hollywood, both having just demonstrated skills that most people didn't even know they possessed. Behind the cool personas and the movie star images were serious craftsmen who'd spent years honing abilities that they might use for only seconds on screen. Hal Needham stepped up, looking between them. You two just made every other actor in this town look like an amateur. Dean shrugged. We just practiced more. But it was more than that, and everyone watching knew it. What Dean and Clint had demonstrated wasn't just about practicing. It was about dedication to authenticity, about refusing to fake it, about respecting the craft and the history of the Western genre enough to actually become proficient at the skills their characters needed. Clint explained his philosophy to the gathered crowd. When I play a gunfighter, I want to honor the real men who live that life. They weren't actors. They were professionals who survived by being better than everyone else. If I'm going to pretend to be one of them, the least I can do is learn the skills they would have had. Dean nodded in agreement. Every time I strap on a gun belt, I think about the men who wore them for real. They didn't have the luxury of retakes or stunt doubles. They had to be fast, accurate, and decisive, or they died. When I draw on screen, I wanted to look like I could have survived in their world. This was the secret that separated the great Western stars from the merely good ones. The great ones, the ones who became legends, they put in the work. They learned to ride horses properly, not just sit on them while being led around. They learned to draw and shoot, to handle guns with respect and skill. They studied the history, understood the reality behind mythology, the training behind the talent. After the demonstration, as the crowd dispersed and filming resumed, Dean and Clint sat together in the shade, two professionals sharing trade secrets. Dean asked Clint about his training regimen. I start every day with dry fire practice, Clint explained. Guns not loaded, just practicing the draw and trigger pull. 50 repetitions minimum. Then I'll do live fire at the range twice a week. But the key isn't the shooting. The key is the muscle memory. Your hand has to know where the gun is without thinking about it. Dean agreed. Arvo taught me the same thing. He said the conscious mind is too slow. By the time you think draw, a faster man has already shot you. The draw has to be pure instinct, triggered by the decision act, not by the conscious thought of how to act. They discuss the mechanics of the fast draw, the importance of a properly fitted holster, positioned at exactly the right angle and height, the grip of the gun shaped to fit your hand perfectly, the weight balance of the weapon, the timing of the hammer, pull coordinated with the draw motion. Most people think it's all about hand speed, Clint said, but it's really about efficiency. The shortest path from holster to target. No wasted motion. Every movement serving a purpose. Like Fred Astaire dancing, Dean said, he made it look effortless because every movement was perfect. No excess, no showing off. Just pure technique executed flawlessly. Clint smiled at the comparison. Exactly. A fast draw is a dance. And like any dance, you practice until you can do it without thinking. The conversation turned to specific training techniques. Dean shared his method of practicing with an unloaded gun while watching television, drawing during commercial breaks hundreds of times a night. Clint talked about practicing his aim by focusing on increasingly smaller targets, training his eyes to find and lock onto specific points instantly. Both men emphasized the mental aspect of the training. The visualization, seeing the perfect draw in your mind before executing it physically. The meditation required to stay calm under pressure. The focus needed to block out everything except the moment of the draw. Fear makes you slow, Dean observed, or it makes you rush and get sloppy. The only way to overcome it is to practice so much that the fear doesn't have time to interfere. Your body moves before your mind can get scared. Clint nodded. That's why we practice. So when the cameras are rolling, when there's pressure and eyes watching, the skill is still there. Automatic. Reliable. The ripple effect through Hollywood. Word of what happened on that set spread through Hollywood within hours. By that evening, every studio in town knew that Dean Martin had drawn in .2 seconds and Clint Eastwood had drawn and fired accurately in under 7/10. The story grew with each telling, as Hollywood stories do. But the core truth remained remarkable enough without embellishment. The next generation of Western actors took notice. Young performers who'd been content to fake their way through gunfighter roles suddenly realized that the bar had been raised. If Dean Martin, the singer and comedian, could achieve that level of skill, what excuse did they have? Arvo Ola's phone started ringing off the hook. Suddenly, every actor with a Western in development wanted training. Real training. The kind that Dean and Clint had committed to. Ohola's rates went up, but he was worth it. He'd proven he could turn entertainers into legitimate gunfighters. Directors noticed too. When casting Westerns, they started asking actors about their quick draw skills. Studios began adding gun training to preparation budgets. The Western genre experienced a renaissance of authenticity, a return to the values that had made the great Westerns of the past so compelling. But the impact went beyond just Westerns. The story of Dean and Clint's dedication to mastering their craft became a parable about professionalism in Hollywood. Here were two massive stars, men who could have coasted on charisma and name recognition, instead putting in the unglamorous work of becoming genuinely skilled at something most people would never notice. Other actors began applying the same principle to their own roles. Method actors studying accents and mannerisms had already established this precedent, but Dean and Clint brought it to the physical skills. If you were going to play a boxer, you learned to box properly. If you were going to play a musician, you learned the instrument. If you were going to play a soldier, you learned to handle weapons with military precision. The craft of acting elevated. The respect for the details deepened. And two men who made it look effortless had reminded everyone that effortless is the result of enormous effort. The legacy of that dusty morning. Years later, both Dean Martin and Clint Eastwood would reflect on that day in interviews, though neither man made a big deal of it. When asked about the .2 second draw, Dean would usually deflect with humor. "I was trying to get to lunch faster," he'd joke. But in more serious moments, he'd acknowledge the satisfaction of mastering something difficult. Clint, in his characteristically thoughtful way, spoke about how the experience informed his later work as a director. "That day taught me that the things you don't see on screen are often as important as what you do see," he said in a 1987 interview. Dean spent thousands of hours practicing that draw. "I spent years working on combat accuracy. The audience sees maybe 5 seconds of gunplay in a film, but they can feel the authenticity. They can sense when an actor really knows what they're doing versus when they're faking it." The footage of Dean's .2 second draw was kept in the Paramount archives. Occasionally, film students and Western enthusiasts would request to see it, studying the mechanics of the motion, trying to understand how it was possible. The film became a teaching tool, an example of what human skill and dedication could achieve. Clint's accurate combat draw, meanwhile, became his signature move in later films. Directors would build scenes around it, knowing that Clint could execute a draw and fire sequence that looked absolutely real, because it was absolutely real. No camera tricks, no editing magic, just pure skill. The friendship between Dean and Clint deepened after that day. They'd always respected each other professionally, but now there was an additional bond. They'd pushed each other to demonstrate their best work, and neither had backed down. They'd shown vulnerability by putting their skills on display for judgment, and they'd both delivered excellence. In Hollywood's competitive environment, that kind of mutual respect was rare. But Dean and Clint understood something that many others didn't. True professionals don't feel threatened by others' excellence. They're inspired by it. They use it to elevate their own game. The final chapter. Dean Martin continued making Westerns through the early 1970s. His gun work remained impeccable, though he never again attempted to publicly time his draw. That .2 second achievement stood as his personal best, a peak moment of skill that he was content to have reached once. Clint Eastwood, of course, went on to become one of the most successful Western directors in history. Films like Unforgiven and The Outlawed Josie Wales showcased not just his acting skills, but his deep understanding of the genre, an understanding that included the physical realities of gunfighting. When Clint directed gunfight scenes, they had a weight and authenticity that came from genuine knowledge. The Western genre eventually faded from its peak popularity, replaced by other forms of action cinema. But the legacy of men like Dean and Clint, who insisted on authenticity and skill, influenced how action films were made for decades to come. The push for actors to do their own stunts, to actually learn the skills their characters needed, can be traced back to moments like that morning in 1968. When asked late in his life what he was most proud of professionally, Dean Martin mentioned the .2-second draw. Not the hit records, not the television show, not the Rat Pack performances. The draw. Because, he explained, anyone with talent can sing, but that draw, that took everything I had. That took discipline, dedication, and the willingness to fail 1,000 times before succeeding once. That's what I'm proud of. Not the result, but what it took to get there. Clint's perspective was characteristically different, but equally profound. Dean, prove you could be the fastest, Clint said. I tried to prove you could be the most effective. Together, I think we showed that excellence comes in different forms. There's no single right way to master something. There's only dedication, practice, and the courage to put your skills on display. The lesson that endures. The story of Dean Martin's .2-second draw and Clint Eastwood's response has become legend in Hollywood. It gets told in acting classes, in film schools, in documentaries about the Western genre. But the real story isn't about speed or accuracy. It's about two men who refuse to be satisfied with good enough. Dean Martin could have shown up to his Westerns, learned his lines, and let a stunt double handle the gun work. Clint Eastwood could have relied on camera angles and editing to make his draws look fast. They were big enough stars that nobody would have complained. Nobody would have known the difference. But they would have known, and that was enough. They held themselves to a higher standard because that's what professionals do. That's what artists do. They push themselves to achieve excellence even when nobody would notice if they didn't. That dusty morning in July 1968, 50 people watched two legends demonstrate mastery, but the real audience was themselves. Dean wanted to know if he could draw in .2 seconds. Clint wanted to prove his combat accuracy. They weren't performing for crowd. They were testing themselves, pushing their limits, seeing what they were truly capable of. And in doing so, they left behind a legacy that transcends Hollywood and Westerns and fast draws. They left behind an example of what it means to be great at something. Not for fame, not for money, not for applause. Great, because being great is its own reward. The .2-second draw, the accurate combat fire. Two different achievements, both requiring years of dedication, both executed perfectly on a summer morning when it mattered. That's the story. That's the legend. That's what happens when talent meets dedication, when skill meets courage, when two masters of their craft push each other to show the world what's possible. Dean Martin drew his gun in .2 seconds. Clint Eastwood fired accurately in under 7/10. And everyone who witnessed it understood they'd seen something special, something real, something that reminded them why they fell in love with movies in the first place. Because when it's done right, when it's done with genuine skill and dedication, when it's done by true masters of craft, it's not just entertainment, it's art. And that morning in 1968, art was on full display.